All right, ready to ditch those fireworks and dive into something even more exciting for Independence Day?
Uh-huh, I like that.
We're going deep into the Treaty of Paris.
Yeah.
This document didn't just end a revolution, it actually made the United States
Right.
officially.
It's true, it's true. We always think about, like, the exciting declarations and the battles and yeah.
Yeah.
But this treaty, this is where, like, the rubber meets the road, you know what I mean? This is where those ideals become real.
It's like, okay, we've got the ideas, now how do we make this stick?
Exactly, yeah.
And you know what they say about breakups, right?
Uh-oh.
It's like, sometimes that agreement afterward, that's what really tells the story.
It's such a good point. It's so true.
So we're going right to the source for this one.
Love it.
No textbook summaries. We're looking at excerpts straight from the Treaty of Paris.
This is exciting. It's not just about, like, the end of a war. It's the birth certificate of a nation, you know?
Oh, I like that.
We're going deep.
A birth certificate. So Article 1, it's like getting right to it, no messing around.
Straight to the point.
Great Britain, they officially say, okay, we recognize you, United States of America.
All 13. Don't forget, all 13 states, all listed out.
It's official. You're free, you're independent, you're sovereign. It's a big deal.
Huge.
Mm.
Because think about it, right? Declaring yourself independent, that's one thing. But to have a global superpower, like Great Britain, to say, yeah, we agree, you're a real country now, and put it in writing, that's massive. You can't really, like, borrow money from other countries. You can't really sign treaties. You can't even go to war on your own terms if nobody else sees you as, like, a legitimate nation.
Right. It's like you've got to be recognized to actually do anything.
Exactly. Article 1, it was absolutely essential for the United States to even function on the world stage. You know, it's like an invitation to the big leagues.
Okay, so you're in the club, you're a real country now, but then it's like, what do you actually get? What's yours?
Right. What are the perks?
And that's where Article 2 comes in. We're talking boundaries.
Boundaries. And it gets very specific. We're not talking about just like, oh, you get that side of the continent, we'll keep this.
Right, none of that.
This is detailed. Imagine negotiators hunched over maps with their quills and ink, right? Drawing lines across a whole continent. I mean, from the Atlantic all the way to the Mississippi, they're literally shaping the future. We're talking about specific mountains, rivers, even trees in some cases, used as markers.
Wow, they really got into the weeds with this. It makes you wonder, with all that detail, were there still, gray areas, spots where maybe the lines weren't so clear?
Oh, absolutely. And those vague spots, they definitely cause some headaches later on.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, for example, you've got the northwest angle of Nova Scotia mentioned in there.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Sure, northwest, got it.
But, map making wasn't exactly an exact science back in 1783, and that lack of precision would actually lead to, like, decades of debate and arguments down the line.
So it's like they kind of left some homework for the future generations to squabble over.
You could say that, but hey, even with all this talk about borders and territory, there's other stuff, everyday things that matter too, right?
Like what?
Well, like, say, fishing. Article 3 dives right into that. It might
Yeah.
seem a little out of place after all the grand nation-building stuff.
Yeah, kind of a weird thing to focus on after declaring independence, right? Oh, and by the way, about those fish.
Right. But it was a really big deal. Remember, this is a nation built on trade and natural resources. Fishing wasn't just about, like, dinner. It was about economic survival, international trade, the whole deal.
So this Article 3, it was about making sure those industries could keep going, even after the revolution.
Absolutely. This article guaranteed that the United States could still fish in the waters off Newfoundland, which were British, and other British territories.
Yeah.
It wasn't a small concession at all.
It really shows you how, even in this big treaty about, freedom and new beginnings, it's still connected to those real everyday things people relied on.
Exactly, yeah, those connections to, the day-to-day. And it's not just industries, it's about money too, right?
Yeah.
Because even revolutions, they don't happen for free.
There's always a bill.
Always. And Article 4, that's where they address this big thing, this debt hanging over everything. It's about those debts that Americans, citizens, owed to British creditors.
Yeah.
You know.
It's like a reminder in the middle of everything. Like, hey, yeah, congrats on the whole independence thing, but you can't just walk away from your debts.
Right. And it's not even just about, like, settling accounts. This was about setting a standard for how the United States, this brand new country, how they were going to handle money matters on the world stage. It's like they're saying, look, we might be breaking away, but we're serious about keeping our word, especially when it comes to finances.
That's a big statement to make when you're just starting out, financially speaking. But okay, so we've talked about commitments to like industries and money. But what about the people? Like those caught in the middle of this whole separation, Article 5 and 6, they tackle a really tricky topic. The loyalists.
Yeah, the loyalist. It's easy to think of this treaty just as like a triumphant moment,
Yeah.
victory. But it's so much more complicated than that.
Way more nuanced.
Right. And these articles, they show us that. It's one thing to say you want freedom to fight for it, but then what do you do about the people who didn't want to fight, who didn't choose your side? It gets messy.
And these articles, are they trying to like find a solution for that?
They're trying. It's about balancing things. On the one hand, you've got this need for a clean break, a fresh start for the nation. But then there's the reality. People's lives were turned upside down. These articles, they talk about things like property, loyalist property that was taken, and they encourage the states to, make things right, to give back what they could, allow for debts to be repaid.
It sounds like a really delicate balancing act, trying to build unity but also acknowledging this huge division that ran right through the new nation.
It is. It really is. And the treaty, it doesn't shy away from that. It admits that there's anger, there's betrayal on both sides. I think it's actually a really interesting look at how hard it is to make peace, especially after a fight that divided people so deeply.
So it's not about pretending those hard feelings weren't there.
No, not at all.
No.
It's more like, okay, how do we move on from this? How do we find a way to live together, even if we don't agree on everything?
And maybe, sometimes, agreeing to disagree is a good place to start.
Sometimes it's the only place to start.
So we see that back and forth in these articles, that pull between what's idealistic and what's actually doable.
Definitely.
And speaking of what's doable, Articles 7, 8, and 9, it feels like we're shifting gears a bit here, We've got the what of independence, but now it's getting into the how.
The nitty-gritty details.
Like, okay, we've drawn the lines on the map, we've made our declarations, now how do we actually make this whole peace thing work?
Exactly. It's about taking those big ideas and turning them into action. Article 7, for example, talks about the British troops. They have to withdraw. Prisoners of war, they need to be released. It even gets into the return of property. And there's this really interesting part about basically not taking enslaved people with you when you leave.
Wow, that's a heavy detail. It really shows you, even as they're talking about freedom for this new nation, it wasn't simple, Not everyone got to share in that freedom equally.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that these big historical moments, they're always more complex than they seem at first glance. But Article 7, it doesn't just deal with those really difficult issues. There's also something kind of surprising in there. It says that Britain has to return archives.
Archives? Like what, old documents and stuff?
Yeah, records, deeds, papers, all kinds of things, but they all belong to the U.S.
So it's like not just land and resources, but also like reclaiming their story, their history.
Exactly. Think about it. These weren't just pieces of paper. They represented the story of a nation, right? Proof of everything they went through to get to this point to independence. By demanding those documents back, the United States was saying, this is our story, and we're taking control of how it gets told.
It makes you realize those documents, they must have held so much power, Like they were a part of the nation's identity.
For sure. And the treaty keeps going. Article 8 takes us to the Mississippi River. And this is big because it was a major route for trade and transportation.
Yeah.
And this article, it says that the river, it shall forever remain free and open to both British and American citizens.
Wow. Talk about thinking ahead. They were basically agreeing to share this incredibly important waterway. They must have known it wasn't just about their two countries, but about the future of, well, the whole continent. But after all the fighting and mistrust, did they really believe this peace would actually last?
It's the big question, right? Article 9, I think it tries to address that. It's like that last handshake after you make a deal. Just to be sure.
Making sure everyone's on the same page.
Right, exactly. It deals with any territory that might have changed hands super late in the game. Basically saying, whatever we grabbed at the last minute, we're giving it back. Let's just move on.
A last effort to clear the air.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that. Or maybe it was just practical, like neither side had the energy to keep fighting over every little thing. Either way, it shows you how this whole treaty, it's a balancing act between what they wanted ideally and what was actually possible.
Idealism versus realism.
Exactly. And then finally, we get to Article 10. Everything important has been covered, and this last article is pretty straightforward. Just an agreement that they'll officially sign off on the whole thing within 6 months. Done deal.
Like the final signature on a life-changing contract. It's amazing to think about. This document, written centuries ago, it shaped the destiny of nations.
Hmm.
It's still impacting the world we live in.
It really does show you the power of communication. Even when things were so tense, so difficult, they sat down, they talked, they found a way forward. The Treaty of Paris, it reminds us that even after you declare independence, even after a revolution, the work isn't over. It takes negotiation, compromise, working together to really build a lasting peace.
The Treaty of Paris, it's not just history, is it? It's a document that still has something to say about diplomacy, about nations, about how we try to balance what's right with what's possible. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into this incredible document.
And hopefully it will make you think, maybe even do some exploring of your own. History is full of these fascinating stories, these documents that shaped the world.
So until next time, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.